So I'm going to do an advanced video on charting, as it were, just to try to clear up some ideas here. So just taking it from where we were, essentially, I want to go more into spiral dynamics and developmental theory a little bit and parallel it. So if you haven't, understood or watched, I'd suggest watching a video or two by Don Beck, Spiral Dynamics. And then I'm going to pick up a couple other topics that I'll bring up in the process, such as Terence McKenna and a few things. So what I've done here is you see the green and then the red, the green and the red. The green outlines here, these ones, are sort of internal stacking patterns, as all of these are in a certain way. You can look at them from different perspectives. Physiologically, it is much like the reptilian brainstem, the mammalian limbic system, the neocortex. And these are just rough and ready distinctions in many regards, but they nevertheless sort of parallel, I believe, the interiority of the sentient being. So in that sense, the reptile's interiority is one of mostly instinctual nature, fight or flight, roughly. The mammalian limbic system is one of roughly care for other. That's why you see mammals seeming to, show care for their immediate kin and or even groups outside of their genetic heritage, as chimps sometimes do, and so forth. And then with the neocortex, you're getting into rational thinking, ability to objectify in a more proper sense. And I would argue that we do see inklings of that before we actually hit the proper neocortex. It's just the neocortex is what really comes online. So that's the third round, in a sense. So, all of evolution's happening until it really gains an I sense, an ability, therefore, to do the fight or flight stuff, which is essentially all of what evolution has been talked about up to this point, in a certain way. So Darwin's theory of fight or flight, I think, is sort of delegated or regulated just to that primary I instinct to survive. However, I think there's a compounding or stacking of novelty that's taking place. And in that sense, when we see the limbic system coming online, it's not only survival that's a mode of, primary mode of being, but now actually I would say it's more important, a more higher focus is one of care for the others. That is to say that they have enough safety within the group that they can actually care for the others through emotion. And that's why we see with mammals REM sleep, in my opinion. REM sleep allows them to have a sense of other, even though it's not a cognitive sense of other. And then in so doing that, there's making an emotional connection to the other beings. Reptiles, they only seem to get into hypnagogic states, not into REM sleep. So we're also building in this process an integrative system of states of consciousness, along with developmental and perspectival, into one map without having distinctions, really. Yeah, that's the goal here. So the third sort of correlate is the neocortex, and that seems to, we see this ability to objectify start with higher mammals, chimps, and then dolphins, I'd say. They're starting to build it, and then that's up here in a certain way. And in spiral dynamics, that third focus, that means a baby's already moved through the first two in a certain way. When they hit the third focus, in an I sense, that's beige. So beige is the activation of self-reflectivity, in my opinion, when they first recognize that I am a self in relation to other. Now, they talk about that in red with sort of first person perspective, and I'm going to get into the diciness of that a little bit in a moment, because I'm going to frame that a little bit differently than what and how they did that. And then with this whole thing, so we had beige as sort of that whole I, it, sort of equals I. It, I is better. It, I, in brackets. And then that has a spectrum. And that would go from the first beings that have glimmerings of self-reflexivity to, ones that have more of a constant, ready state of it. And then when they finally make their self as an I am this, a proper object, then you're getting into a we, because now we can interact. And I would argue that this really didn't come online in evolution till almost like 100,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, something like that, 50,000 probably, with the magical cultures that we see around the world. And so in that sense, you're getting an it, we. And that means that there still isn't, so when they dance, they think that they're causing rain to fall. They think that clouds follow them. So there's a sense of pretty constant I, but it's relegated or connected to the exterior world, and how the world changes that I. So that's the vagueness in a certain way down there. And very connected, far more connected in many regards than our culture has been because of that. And so there's all those back to the earth, thinking. We need to go back to, in a certain sense, I don't agree with a lot of it. I think it's very, very mistaken in many ways. But in the sense that it had more collectivity with the focus, the rest of Spiral Land, which is all in here, that collectivity is real, and it's the strongest probably it has been in the more or less human culture. But when red comes online, a pretty big transition takes place, and then we're getting into this. So I guess it would be considered it focus. But with red, it's it, I. So we could have diced up this more, but there just wasn't much happening. And what I think happens with these big transitions too is that they happen a lot quicker. What I mean by that is that even though this took 40,000 years, in a certain sense that's pretty quick to move through it, but what it is it's actually paralleling the stage that went before, so we move through it more quickly. Because this is a parallel to the emotive state of mammals, but now with for the first time in a sense with the neocortex. But when you get into this is really quite new territory. So red is exploring this it space proper, where the neocortex can really be sort of used. And then you see sort of real civilization starting to prop itself up. And red, you get 10,000 years ago, and it has more of that I focus, power God. I want to, build the world for me in a certain way. And then it gets into it, we. So that it, I equals red. It, we would equal blue. And why I say that is that blue is these absolutistic structures. So you have an it structure that is founded on a we mythos, similar in some sense to the purple meme, which is that magical thinking, but it's a concrete thing that they're basing it off, and this was all language tradition. This one is all kind of more or less written tradition that ought not ever be changed. Just as they looked up into the stars and saw them as infinite cycles that never changed, God beings, as stars, you know, and I think there's a lot of other sorts of truths in this, but it was mixed up in many ways with mythologies, in my opinion. That's just my view on it. And so that's why you get sort of more of a blue absolutism that's kind of built into it. And then with reason, or the Enlightenment period, then you get it. And this is hyper-agetic, hyper-individual focused. It is right up there. And that's why there's a certain sort of gremlinishness to that worldview, which is still kind of the dominating worldview. You know, we've moved into postmodernism and are in sort of a vague land. But this, because of its potency as the focus, and has been the focus in a major way, there's a pathological strain to this object-object focus. I don't know how to put it any clearer. But so that's orange, scientific, behavioristic sort of thing, empirist. And then with postmodernism, we're starting to get down into this its, which is systems theory. But it's flatland, as is sometimes called by Kant, which means it's systems, but it's systems relegated just to this side of the world. The flatland equals essentially exterior. But they have a lot of interest in a lot of people like, you know, spirituality, but it's all kind of exterior stuff, often, which is a weird paradox. But then when you get down into this proper, a new I is activated. So as much in the way that beige moved through this pretty quickly and purple moved through that pretty quickly, I think that yellow's going to move through. So we've now had a couple of